There are 2,781 billionaires in the world today. You know the names of perhaps 30 of them. The rest, the majority, the ones whose combined wealth shapes markets, governments, and entire industries, have made a deliberate, expensive, professionally maintained decision that you will never know their names. That decision is not modesty, it is strategy. And the strategy is working so completely that most people do not even know there is a strategy defined. Until now. Please subscribe and activate the button to help us reach 1,000 subscribers so we can bring you more relevant content and so YouTube can notify you when we publish new videos. The first secret is the one that makes all the others possible. Wealth at the highest level is not a number. It is not a figure on a screen, a balance in an account, or a valuation attached to a portfolio of assets. Those things exist, and they matter operationally, but they are not the point. The point, the thing that the ultra-rich understand, and that almost no one outside their world ever fully grasps, is that real wealth is a system. A living, self-maintaining, continuously adapting system, designed to produce specific outcomes across time, regardless of what any individual market, government, or external force attempts to do to it. A number can be taxed. A number can be seized. A number can be inflated away, litigated into insignificance, or simply lost through a single catastrophic decision by the person holding it. A system survives all of those things because a system does not depend on any single element remaining intact. When one part is threatened, the other parts absorb the pressure. When one jurisdiction becomes hostile, the capital moves to another. When one relationship deteriorates, the network provides alternatives. The system continues because it was built to continue, not to perform well in any specific set of conditions, but to function across all conditions, including the ones nobody anticipated. This is the foundational secret, and it is hiding in plain sight. The ultra-rich do not manage money, they manage systems, and the people who help them, the lawyers, the bankers, the advisors, the architects of the structures that hold everything together, are not financial professionals in the ordinary sense. They are systems engineers, people whose entire professional purpose is the construction and maintenance of an architecture that converts wealth into something considerably more durable than wealth, into permanence. Now consider what it takes to build permanence in a world that is structurally hostile to the concentration of resources in private hands. A world with progressive taxation, with inheritance laws, with regulatory frameworks explicitly designed to prevent the kind of compounding advantage that dynastic wealth requires. A world with investigative journalists, with transparency initiatives, with the growing technical capacity of governments to trace capital flows across borders that previously offered complete opacity. Building permanence in that world is not a passive achievement. It is an active, continuous, resource-intensive project. And the first requirement of the project, the non-negotiable prerequisite for everything else, is understanding something about the nature of power that most people never learn, because the people who learned it have a strong interest in keeping the lesson private. Power, at the level that produces permanence, is not exercised through money directly. Money is too visible, too traceable, too subject to the legal and social constraints that govern financial transactions. Power is exercised through relationships, through information, through the specific, carefully cultivated proximity to the people and systems that make decisions affecting everyone, a proximity that money enables but that money alone cannot purchase. You can buy access. You cannot buy trust. And trust, the specific, high-stakes, professionally consequential trust that operates between people who have demonstrated reliability to each other under real conditions, is the actual currency of power at the highest level. The ultra-rich do not accumulate money the way they accumulate trust. Money accumulates through investment. Trust accumulates through time, through consistency, through the repeated experience of being the person who kept their word when keeping it was costly, through being the person who protected someone's interest when no contract required it and no one was watching. That kind of trust is rare in proportion to the altitude at which it operates. And it is worth more than any financial asset, because financial assets can be replicated or surpassed by a better-funded competitor. Trust relationships, the specific, irreplaceable, decades-built connections between people who have chosen each other through experience rather than transaction, cannot be replicated at any price. The secret network that the ultra-rich are accused of maintaining is not a conspiracy. It is something both simpler and more durable than a conspiracy. It is a trust ecosystem. built relationship by relationship over generations, by people who understood before they were 30 that the return on a well-placed friendship, maintained with patience and integrity across decades, would dwarf the return on any financial instrument they would ever touch. That ecosystem is the infrastructure of permanent wealth. Everything else, the structures, the assets, the strategies, the systems, is built on top of it. And you were never supposed to understand that the foundation was human. Here is a secret that will change how you read every financial news story for the rest of your life. The wealth you see is not the wealth that exists. Not because the visible wealth is fake, it is real, documented, and in many cases staggering in scale, but because the relationship between visible wealth and actual wealth, at the highest levels of the global economy, is closer to the relationship between a building's facade and its foundation than to the relationship between a price tag and a product. The facade is what the public sees. The foundation is what makes the building stand. And the foundation of serious wealth is almost never visible from the street. Consider the mechanics. A family of significant dynastic wealth does not hold its assets in anyone's name. Not the patriarch's name, not the family name, not any name that would connect the human beings who benefit from the assets to the legal structures that hold them. What exists instead is a constellation of entities, holding companies in jurisdictions chosen for their privacy protections, trusts governed by laws selected for their favorable treatment of multi-generational wealth, foundations structured to provide both tax efficiency and genuine philanthropic function, and operating businesses that generate real revenue while providing legitimate commercial justification for the movement of capital between entities. Each layer was designed to accomplish something specific. Each jurisdiction was chosen after extensive legal analysis for a precise combination of characteristics, and the overall structure, the complete picture of how everything connects, who ultimately benefits, and what the architecture is designed to protect, exists nowhere in any single document. Because the moment the complete picture is committed to paper, it becomes discoverable. And discoverable is precisely what the structure was built to prevent. This is not illegal, in most cases, in most jurisdictions. It is architecture, built within the law, by the best legal minds that significant money can engage, specifically to produce outcomes that are legal in their individual components and largely invisible in their aggregate effect. The shock is not that this exists. The shock is the scale at which it operates. Estimates of the total wealth held in offshore and opaque structures globally range from $21 trillion to $32 trillion. That range, $11 trillion wide, tells you everything about how well the architecture is working. Even the people whose job it is to measure the thing cannot agree on its dimensions, because the thing was specifically designed to resist measurement. $21 to $32 trillion. Hidden, legal, permanent. Now watch how the hidden architecture intersects with something far more familiar, the luxury objects that signal wealth on the surface while concealing its depth below. The collector who acquires a significant piece of art through a private transaction, structured through an entity in a jurisdiction that does not maintain publicly searchable ownership records, has done something that operates simultaneously in 3 registers. Commercially, they have acquired an asset whose value tends to appreciate with a consistency that few financial instruments match over long periods. Legally, they have placed a significant asset inside a structure that provides both privacy and specific advantages that differ by jurisdiction. And socially, they have acquired an object that communicates, to the people in whose presence it is eventually displayed, a level of cultural formation and aesthetic authority that no amount of transparent wealth can purchase directly. The art is simultaneously an investment, a legal instrument, and a social signal. And the person who owns it never has to mention any of those 3 functions in any conversation. The object speaks, to anyone fluent in the language it speaks, without the owner saying a word. This is the sophistication of the hidden architecture at its most refined, when the financial function and the social function and the legal function of an asset are so thoroughly integrated that they operate as a single, unified instrument. The painting on the wall is not a painting, it is a strategy. The watch on the wrist is not a watch, it is a credential. The address, the club, the school, the specific calibration of every visible element of a life constructed at this level, none of it is decoration. Every element is load-bearing. Every element serves the architecture, and the architecture serves a single overriding purpose, which is the one that the ultra-rich work hardest to keep invisible, because it is the one that, if widely understood, would generate the most resistance. The architecture is not designed to make them rich. They are already rich. It is designed to ensure that their children, and their children's children, begin the game at a position so far ahead of where everyone else starts that the concept of competition between them becomes, in any meaningful sense, a fiction. The most carefully guarded secret in the world of serious wealth is not a financial strategy. It is an educational one. The ultra-rich do not primarily send their children to elite schools because the schools are academically superior, though some of them are. They send them there because the schools perform a function that no curriculum, no faculty, and no academic program can explain in any prospectus: the function of relationship formation at the correct altitude during the years when relationships form most deeply and endure most durably. The 14-year-old who sits next to the future prime minister in a dormitory, who competes against the future central bank governor on an athletics field, who develops the specific intimacy of shared adolescence with people who will, 20 years later, occupy positions of consequential authority. That 14-year-old is not simply receiving an education, they are being woven into a fabric. A social fabric that will hold them, connect them, and provide structural support for everything they attempt for the rest of their lives. The academic content is secondary. The relationships are the product. And here is the part that makes this mechanism so durable across generations. The relationships formed at these institutions are not maintained through effort. They are maintained through the ambient structure of a shared world. The same clubs, the same summer geographies, the same cultural references, aesthetic standards, and ways of moving through rooms that mark everyone who was formed in the same environment. The recognition when two people from the same institution encounter each other 40 years later in any context anywhere in the world is immediate and involuntary. It precedes any assessment of the other person's current position, their recent performance, their demonstrated competence in the matter at hand. The recognition comes first. Everything else comes second. And the recognition creates a presumption of belonging, a default assumption of shared values and mutual reliability, that a person without the shared formation has to earn from scratch, through demonstrated performance, over time. The person with the formation does not have to earn it. They inherited it at 14. That inheritance is worth more than any financial bequest, because it cannot be taxed, cannot be traced, and compounds across every interaction for the remainder of a life. Now watch how this educational secret extends into the professional infrastructure that the ultra-rich build around their wealth, because this is where the hidden mechanism becomes most consequential for everyone outside it. The advisor who has managed a family's affairs across 2 generations does not simply know the financial position. They know the family. They know which members are reliable and which require management. They know the history of decisions made under pressure and what those decisions revealed about character. They know where the vulnerabilities are and what the family will and will not sacrifice to protect against them. They know things that no document records and no due diligence process uncovers, because the things they know were revealed in the specific intimacy of a professional relationship maintained through crises that the family would prefer to forget. That knowledge makes the advisor irreplaceable in a way that no credential and no fee structure can replicate. And the family's relationship with that advisor, built on the specific trust that only comes from having been genuinely helpful when it was genuinely difficult, is itself an asset, an invisible, unbalanced, sheeted asset that protects the visible assets more effectively than any legal structure. The ultra-rich build these relationships deliberately. They invest in advisors, in institutions, in the specific people whose future competence and loyalty they are cultivating, not because the immediate return is visible, but because the long-term return is the foundation on which everything else rests. They are patient in a way that people managing quarterly performance cannot afford to be. They are building something that will outlast them, and the patience required for that kind of construction is itself a form of advantage, because most of their potential competitors are too focused on this quarter's results to make the investments that pay off in the next generation. But the deepest secret, the one underneath all the relationship management, the educational infrastructure, the advisor networks, and the legal architectures, is something that almost no analysis of wealth ever states directly. The system does not perpetuate itself because the rich are smarter than everyone else. It perpetuates itself because they started earlier in their own lives, because formation began at birth, earlier in history, because the structures were built by people who have been dead for a century, earlier in every relationship, every investment, every strategic position, because having been inside the system for generations means arriving at every opportunity before the people who are still trying to find the entrance. The starting position is the secret, and the starting position cannot be purchased retroactively. Everything we have examined so far, the trust ecosystems, the hidden architecture, the educational infrastructure, the multi-generational patience, is the defensive layer, the part of the system designed to protect what already exists. But there is an offensive layer, a set of strategies the ultra-rich use not to preserve wealth but to actively extend it. And that layer operates in ways that most people will find genuinely difficult to accept. Here is the reversal that reframes everything. The ultra-rich do not simply protect their advantage. They actively manufacture the conditions under which their advantage compounds. And the primary mechanism through which they do this is one that operates in complete public view, that is reported on extensively, that is the subject of more analysis and commentary than almost any other topic in financial media, and that is, despite all of that exposure, almost universally misunderstood in its actual function. The mechanism is philanthropy. Not philanthropy in the sense of charity, the genuine giving of resources to causes that produce no return for the giver. Philanthropy as a strategic instrument, as a method for extending influence into domains that commercial activity and political affiliation cannot reach, with a legitimacy and a durability that neither can match. The foundation funded by serious wealth is not primarily a vehicle for distributing money to worthy causes, though it does distribute money to worthy causes. It is a vehicle for maintaining presence, access, and influence in the specific institutional ecosystems, universities, hospitals, cultural institutions, policy organizations, scientific research bodies, that shape the intellectual and cultural environment in which the wealth operates. Consider what a significant university endowment actually purchases beyond the buildings that carry a family's name. It purchases proximity to the institution's intellectual output, the research, the emerging ideas, the specific directions of inquiry that the endowment's influence helps to sustain and develop. It purchases relationships with the institution's leadership, whose social and intellectual networks extend into government, media, and every domain of consequential public life. It purchases the ability to shape, at the margin, the kind of thinking that the institution produces, which scholars it recruits, which questions it prioritizes, which ideas it treats as worth developing, and which it declines to engage seriously. None of this requires explicit instruction. The influence operates through the ambient understanding, shared by everyone inside the institution, that the relationship with the donor is valuable, that maintaining the relationship requires a certain quality of consideration for the donor's perspective, and that the specific preferences of the donor, about academic direction, about institutional priorities, about the relative importance of different fields and approaches, are preferences worth taking seriously. This is not corruption. The individuals involved are not making explicit exchanges. They are participating in a relationship whose terms are understood without being stated, whose influence operates through culture rather than transaction, and whose effects accumulate over decades in ways that no single decision ever fully captures. The result, over a generation, is an intellectual and cultural environment that has been shaped, at the margins, consistently, in the same direction, by the sustained presence of the same set of values and interests. An environment that feels, to the people inside it, like the natural output of free inquiry and genuine intellectual competition. And that is, in its structural reality, the carefully tended product of relationships maintained for exactly the purpose of producing it. The ultra-rich do not control the culture. They fund the conditions under which certain cultural outcomes become more likely. That is a considerably more defensible position, legally and reputationally, and considerably more effective strategically, than control would be. Now watch how this philanthropic influence intersects with the political dimension, because this is where the consequences move beyond culture into the direct governance of markets and regulations. The policy organization funded by significant private wealth does not issue instructions to legislators. It produces research, analysis, frameworks for understanding economic and social problems that happen, with a consistency that exceeds statistical probability, to align with the regulatory preferences of the people whose resources sustain it. The legislators who read this research are not receiving bribes. They are receiving information produced by credible institutions, staffed by genuinely qualified analysts, presented in formats that make it useful for policy development. The information happens to support conclusions that are favorable to the people who funded the institutions. But the connection is indirect, and the indirection is not incidental. It is the mechanism's most important feature. Direct influence is visible. Visible influence generates resistance. Resistance threatens the outcome. Influence embedded in the infrastructure of knowledge production is invisible. And invisible influence, maintained consistently over years, shapes the options that decision makers consider available, which is a more durable form of power than any direct intervention could produce. The ultra-rich do not just play the game. They fund the institutions that decide which games are worth playing. And that is a form of power that no electoral cycle, no regulatory reform, and no journalistic investigation has ever successfully dismantled. Because by the time the investigation identifies the influence has already produced its effect. There is one final secret, and it is the most counterintuitive one. The ultra-rich are not, in any meaningful psychological sense, free. This is the secret underneath all the other secrets, the reality that the wealth, the architecture, the systems, the networks, and the strategies conceal even from the people inside them, until they have been inside long enough to feel it clearly. The system that protects wealth also imprisons the people who hold it, not through bars or explicit constraint, but through the specific, relentless demands of being the custodian of something that requires constant management, constant vigilance, and the constant performance of a role that was assigned before the person playing it was old enough to understand what they were accepting. The child born into a family of dynastic wealth does not choose the architecture they are born into. They are formed by it, shaped, before they have the capacity for conscious choice, into the specific kind of person the structure requires. They learn, through the ambient culture of their upbringing, what can be said and what cannot, which relationships are appropriate and which create exposure, how public behavior must be managed, how private behavior must be contained, and how the gap between the two must be maintained with a discipline that most people never need to develop because most people are not accountable to a structure whose continuity depends on their behavior. This is the invisible cost, and it is real. The person who carries generational wealth is carrying, simultaneously, the weight of every decision made by people who died before they were born, the obligations encoded in structures built by their grandparents, the relationships maintained across generations whose terms were established before the current custodian entered them, the expectations of people, advisors, partners, institutions, whose trust in the family is based on a track record of consistency that the current generation is obligated to continue, regardless of whether they would have made the same choices themselves. That weight does not make the wealth not worth having, but it makes the wealth something considerably more complex than the outside view suggests. And it produces, in the people who carry it for long enough, a specific quality that is almost universally misread by people who observe them from the outside. It is not arrogance. It is not coldness. It is not the indifference of people who have never needed anything. It is the specific, habituated exhaustion of people who have never been fully off duty. Now consider what this means for everyone watching this who is not inside the system. The secrets exposed in this video are real. The architecture of hidden wealth, the educational infrastructure, the philanthropic influence machinery, the relationship ecosystems that sustain everything, all of it is real, all of it is operating right now, and all of it is producing outcomes that affect your life in ways that you did not consent to and cannot easily opt out of. That reality is uncomfortable. It is supposed to be uncomfortable. The discomfort is accurate. But here is what the discomfort, honestly examined, actually points toward. The system is powerful because most people do not understand it. Not because they are unintelligent, but because the system was specifically designed to be illegible from the outside, to present itself as the natural order, the inevitable outcome of merit, of quality, of the genuine differences between people that produce genuine differences in outcomes, rather than as the constructed, maintained, deliberately obscured architecture of advantage that it actually is. Understanding the system does not dismantle it. That should be stated clearly because false hope is its own form of misdirection. The architecture is too old, too resourced, and too deeply embedded in the legal and cultural infrastructure of the modern world to be dismantled by understanding alone. But understanding it changes your relationship to the choices available to you. It returns to you a form of agency that the system depends on you not exercising, the agency to decide, with clear eyes and accurate information, where you direct your energy, your resources, and your aspirations. The system needs you to aspire to things it defines, to compete on terms it sets, to measure success against standards it establishes, to spend your most productive years climbing a ladder whose rungs were placed by people with an interest in you, climbing rather than building something of your own. Seeing the system clearly does not remove you from it. You are in it. Everyone is in it. But there is an enormous difference between a person who is in the system and does not know it, and a person who is in the system and sees it precisely. The first person is managed. The second person has options. The secrets are no longer secret. What you do next is the only question that was ever yours to answer. Luxury power exists for one reason only: to reveal what the elite pay to hide. Subscribe to Luxury Power and hit the bell now. Every week a new secret is uncovered. Drop in the comments where you're watching from. We love knowing our global audience. Everything you saw here is based on real cases, verified contracts, and documented facts. We don't glorify wealth, we dissect it. Do you still think money buys freedom? Tell us in the comments. Share this with someone who needs to see the truth. And remember, even the most expensive life can be a gilded cage. See you in the next video.